You know what they say about timing. Sometimes it's everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, perfect timing can turn your worst day into your greatest victory. If you want to hear more stories about turning betrayal into triumph, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. I'm 56 years old, and I've been married to Richard Sterling for 28 years. 28 years of being the perfect wife, the supportive partner, the woman who put her dreams on hold so her husband could build his empire. Richard's 62, silver-haired, still handsome, in that distinguished way that makes other women at the country club whisper about how lucky I am. That day, I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. My daughter was graduating summa cum laude. My husband's real estate development company was thriving, and we were celebrating at the finest restaurant in Savannah's historic district. Our closest friends were there, the Hendersons, the Patricks. Even my sister Diane had flown in from Charleston. But you know what they say about assumptions. They make an ass out of you and me. And I was about to become the biggest ass in Georgia. Ashley had just finished her speech, something beautiful, about new beginnings and following your dreams, when Richard stood up. He tapped his champagne flute with his knife, and the table went quiet. "I have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying that confident tone I'd fallen in love with 30 years ago. "This seems like the perfect time with all our loved ones here." I smiled, thinking maybe he was going to surprise me with a trip to Europe, something we'd talked about for years, but never quite managed to take. Instead, Richard looked directly at me and said, "Evelyn, I want a divorce. I'm in love with someone else, and I'm moving out tonight." The silence that followed was deafening. Ashley's champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Diane's mouth fell open. Our friends looked like they'd been slapped. But me, I just sat there perfectly calm and reached into my purse. See, here's what Richard didn't know. I'd been expecting this moment for 3 months. It started back in February, when I was doing our taxes. I've always handled our finances ironic, considering I gave up my career as a financial advisor to support Richard's dreams. But I'm good with numbers, always have been. And numbers don't lie. There were discrepancies, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, credit card charges for restaurants I'd never been to, jewelry I'd never received, weekend trips Richard claimed were business meetings. When you've been managing money for 30 years, you develop an instinct for when something's off. So I hired a private investigator. Her name was Carmen Rodriguez, a former police detective who specialized in marital cases. Carmen was thorough, professional, and within 2 weeks, she had everything I needed. Richard was having an affair with Brittany Walsh, a 28-year-old interior designer he'd met through work. They'd been seeing each other for 8 months. He'd bought her a condo, downtown, a BMW, and a diamond bracelet that cost more than most people make in 6 months. But here's the kicker: he was funding this affair with our joint accounts. Our retirement savings, our daughter's college fund money from the sale of my grandmother's house that I'd inherited. Richard was literally using my money to finance his betrayal. That's when I called my attorney, Margaret Chen. Yes, the same Margaret Chen who'd handled our wills and estate planning. Margaret was shocked, but she was also strategic. "Evelyn," she said, "Georgia is a no-fault divorce state. But we have options. The prenuptial agreement you signed has a fidelity clause. If we can prove adultery, Richard could lose significant assets." The prenuptial agreement. Richard had insisted on it before we married, claiming his family's wealth required protection. I'd signed it thinking it would never matter, because we'd be together forever. I'd forgotten all about the fidelity clause, the part that said if either party committed adultery, they'd forfeit their claim to the other's assets and pay substantial penalties. Margaret and I spent the next month documenting everything: bank statements, credit card records, photographs Carmen had taken, even text messages Richard had carelessly left on his iPad. We froze our joint accounts, secured our assets, and prepared divorce papers that would hit Richard like a financial tsunami. And then we waited for the perfect moment. Back to the Magnolia Room, where my husband had just announced he was leaving me for another woman in front of our daughter and closest friends. I reached into my purse, a vintage Chanel bag Richard had bought me for our 20th anniversary, and pulled out a manila envelope. "Congratulations, Richard," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "I have something for you, too." I slid the envelope across the white tablecloth. Richard looked confused, probably thinking I was going to beg, or cry, or make a scene. Instead, I stood up, smoothed my navy dress, and addressed our stunned guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to Ashley's celebration. Richard, those are divorce papers, along with documentation of your 8-month affair with Brittany Walsh and evidence of the $340,000 you've stolen from our joint accounts to fund your midlife crisis. You'll also find a copy of our prenuptial agreement, specifically page 7, section 3, the fidelity clause you seem to have forgotten about." Richard's face went from confident to confused to absolutely white. "Evelyn, what are you?" "I'm doing what I should have done months ago when I first discovered your affair. I'm protecting myself and our daughter from your selfishness." Ashley was staring at her father like she'd never seen him before. "Dad, is this true? You've been cheating on Mom." Richard opened the envelope with shaking hands. As he read the papers, his expression changed from shock to panic to pure rage. "You can't do this," he screamed loud enough that other diners turned to stare. "You can't freeze our accounts. That's my money too." "Actually," I said calmly, "according to the prenuptial agreement, you insisted I sign adultery. Voids your claim to marital assets. And according to Georgia law, stealing from joint accounts to fund an extramarital affair is considered dissipation of marital assets. So no, Richard, it's not your money anymore." He stood up so fast, his chair toppled backward. "This is insane. You're being vindictive." "I'm being practical. Something I learned during my 15 years as a financial advisor before I gave up my career to support yours." Richard stormed out of the restaurant, but not before grabbing the divorce papers and shouting something about his lawyer that made the elderly couple at the next table clutch their pearls. Our friends sat in stunned silence until Diane finally spoke up. "Evie, honey, how long have you known?" 3 months. I've been planning this for 3 months." Ashley reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Dad was—" "Sweetheart, this isn't your fault. And it's not going to ruin your day. You just graduated with highest honors from one of the best business schools in the country. That's what we're celebrating." But inside, I was shaking. 28 years of marriage gone. The man I'd built a life with loved despite his flaws, supported through every challenge, he'd thrown it all away for a woman young enough to be his daughter. The Hendersons offered to drive me home, but I declined. I needed to face whatever came next on my own terms. Ashley wanted to come with me, but I insisted she go back to her apartment. This was between Richard and me. I drove through Savannah's historic district in my silver Mercedes, a car Richard had bought me for my 50th birthday, probably feeling guilty about some affair I didn't know about then. The Spanish moss hung like curtains from the oak trees, and the antebellum mansions looked peaceful in the evening light. Our house was on Forsyth Park, a beautiful Victorian we'd restored together in the early years of our marriage, when we still dreamed the same dreams. When I pulled into our circular driveway, I could see lights on in Richard's study. His BMW was there, along with a red Camaro I didn't recognize. Brittany's car, I assumed. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes, gathering my courage. Then I walked into the house I'd called home for 15 years. Richard was in the living room, pacing like a caged animal. Brittany was there too, a petite blonde in a tight dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She looked exactly like what she was, a young woman who'd mistaken an older man's desperation for love. "Evelyn," Richard said when he saw me, "we need to talk." "No, Richard, we don't. We needed to talk 8 months ago when you decided to cheat on me. We needed to talk when you started stealing from our accounts. What we need now is for you to pack your things and leave." Brittany stood up, wobbling slightly on her designer heels. Mrs. Sterling, I want you to know that Richard and I are in love. This isn't just some affair. I looked at this child, because that's what she was, a child, and felt something between pity and disgust. Brittany, is it? Let me give you some free advice from someone who's been married longer than you've been alive. When a man cheats with you, he'll cheat on you. When a man steals from his wife to buy you presents, he'll steal from you too. And when a man abandons his family for a younger woman, he's showing you exactly what kind of character he has. You don't understand, she said, her voice getting higher. Richard was unhappy. You weren't meeting his needs. That's when I lost my composure, just for a moment. I wasn't meeting his needs. I gave up my career for him. I moved to 3 different cities for his business. I raised his daughter, managed his household, entertained his clients, and supported every dream he ever had. And you know what he gave me in return? 28 years of marriage and an STD test I had to take last week because I didn't know where he'd been sticking his. Evelyn, Richard interrupted. That's enough. No, Richard, it's not nearly enough, but it's all you're getting from me. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and found 2 suitcases packed by the door. So he'd been planning this for a while. Probably thought he'd make his grand announcement, I'd cry and beg, and he'd ride off into the sunset with his young girlfriend and half our assets. Instead, he was about to discover that the woman he'd underestimated for 28 years had been paying very close attention. The next morning, I met with Margaret Chen and her team. Margaret had brought in a specialist, a divorce attorney named Patricia Williams, who'd built her career destroying cheating husbands in court. Evelyn, Patricia said, your case is a divorce attorney's dream. We have documentation of adultery evidence, of asset dissipation, and a prenuptial agreement with an ironclad fidelity clause. Richard's attorney is going to advise him to settle. What if he doesn't want to settle? Then we go to court and he loses everything. Georgia judges don't look kindly on husbands who steal from their wives to fund affairs. Richard's attorney called that afternoon. His name was Bradley Morrison, and he sounded young and nervous. Mrs. Sterling, my client, would like to discuss a settlement. Mr. Morrison, your client had 28 years to discuss things with me. The time for discussion is over. Mrs. Sterling, surely we can reach some kind of agreement. We did reach an agreement. It's called a prenuptial contract, and your client violated it. Now he gets to live with the consequences. Patricia was right. Within a week, Richard was begging for a settlement. The fidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement was devastating. Not only would he lose claim to our joint assets, but he'd also owe me substantial penalties for the breach of contract. But here's what Richard didn't expect. I wasn't interested in just taking his money. I wanted something more valuable than that. I wanted my life back. During our marriage, I'd dreamed of opening my own financial consulting firm. I'd had the experience, the credentials, the vision, but Richard had always found reasons why it wasn't the right time. His business needed me. Ashley needed me. The house needed renovation. There was always something more important than my dreams. Now suddenly, I had the opportunity to reclaim everything I'd given up. I used my settlement to open Sterling Financial Consulting, specializing in helping women protect their assets during divorce. I rented office space in Savannah's historic district, hired 2 associates, and within 6 months, we were booked solid. My first client was a woman named Jennifer, whose husband had been hiding assets in offshore accounts. My second was a teacher whose husband had been gambling away their retirement savings. My third was a young mother whose husband had been using their joint credit cards to fund his gambling addiction. Each case reminded me why I'd fallen in love with financial planning in the first place. It wasn't about the numbers, it was about helping people take control of their lives. Meanwhile, Richard's life was falling apart. Brittany left him when she realized he was broke. His business partners distanced themselves when word got out about the divorce. He had to sell his BMW and move into a 1-bedroom apartment downtown. Ashley was furious with him. She'd always been Daddy's little girl, but discovering that he'd stolen from her college fund to buy his girlfriend jewelry had opened her eyes to who her father really was. "Mom," she said, during one of our weekly dinners, "I can't believe I didn't see it before. The way he always made everything about him. The way he dismissed your opinions. The way he took credit for your ideas. Sweetheart, love makes us blind sometimes. I spent 28 years making excuses for your father's selfishness. Are you happy now? Really happy?" I thought about that question. Was I happy? I was 56 years old, starting over, building a business from scratch. My marriage was over. My plans for growing old with someone were gone, and I was facing an uncertain future. But you know what? For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, not what someone else needed from me. Yes, I told my daughter, "I'm happy." 1 year after Richard announced he was leaving me at Ashley's graduation, I was sitting in my corner office, overlooking Forsyth Park, reviewing financial statements for Sterling Financial Consulting's first annual report. We'd helped 43 women protect over $12 million in assets during divorce proceedings. We'd uncovered hidden accounts, traced dissipated funds, and held cheating spouses accountable for their financial deceptions. My little firm had become the go-to resource for women facing divorce in the Southeast. But more than that, I'd rediscovered who I was beneath 28 years of being Mrs. Richard Sterling. I was Evelyn Sterling, CPA, financial advisor, business owner, and advocate for women who'd been underestimated by the men in their lives. My phone rang. It was Ashley calling from her new job in Atlanta. "Mom, I have news. I got promoted to senior analyst, and they're sending me to London for 6 months. Ashley, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. I learned from the best. Watching you build your business this year taught me more about strength and determination than 4 years of business school." After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked out at the park where Richard and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. A young couple was sitting on our old bench, sharing a picnic and laughing at something on their phone. I didn't feel sad watching them. I didn't feel regret or longing or any of the emotions I'd expected to feel. I felt grateful. Grateful that Richard's betrayal had forced me to rediscover my own strength. Grateful that his selfishness had given me the push I needed to reclaim my dreams. Grateful that at 56, I'd learned it's never too late to start over. 6 months later, I was having lunch at the Magnolia Room, the same restaurant where Richard had announced he was leaving me. I was there with a client, a woman whose husband had been embezzling from their joint business. As we were finishing our meal, I saw him, Richard, sitting alone at a corner table, looking older and smaller than I remembered. His silver hair had gone completely gray, and his expensive suit had been replaced with a rumpled blazer that had seen better days. Our eyes met across the room. He looked like he wanted to approach, but I turned back to my client and continued our conversation. As we were leaving, Richard stood up. "Evelyn, could I speak with you for a moment?" My client excused herself, and I found myself face to face with the man I'd been married to for 28 years. "You look good," he said. "Successful." "I am successful, Richard. Finally. I heard about your business, helping women in divorce cases. Helping women protect themselves from men who think they can steal and cheat without consequences." He winced. "Evelyn, I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible mistakes. But did you have to destroy me completely?" I looked at this man who'd once been the center of my world, who'd promised to love and cherish me until death did us part, who'd thrown away nearly 3 decades of marriage for a woman half his age. "Richard, I didn't destroy you. I simply stopped enabling you. There's a difference. I lost everything. My business, my reputation, my relationship with Ashley. You lost those things because of your choices, not mine. I just made sure you couldn't take me down with you." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I was wrong about us, about you. I thought you needed me, but I was the one who needed you. I just didn't realize it until it was too late." "Yes," I said simply, "it is too late." I walked away from Richard Sterling for the last time, and I didn't look back. Today, 2 years after that devastating graduation dinner, I'm sitting in my home office, a beautiful space, in the carriage house behind my new townhouse in Savannah's Victorian district. Sterling Financial Consulting has grown to 8 employees, and we're opening a second office in Charleston. I'm dating someone, a wonderful man named James, who's a retired professor at SCAD. He's kind, intelligent, and secure enough in himself that he celebrates my success instead of feeling threatened by it. We take things slowly, enjoying each other's company without the desperate need to merge our entire lives. Ashley visits every few months. She's thriving in London, building her own career, making her own choices. She's learned from watching both her parents, from Richard's mistakes, and from my recovery. "Mom," she said during her last visit, "I used to think marriage was about sacrifice. Watching you give up everything for Dad, I thought that's what love looked like. But now I understand the difference between sacrifice and self-destruction." "What's the difference?" "Sacrifice is temporary and mutual. Self-destruction is permanent and one-sided." Smart girl, my Ashley. She won't make the mistakes I made. As for Richard, I hear he's working as a real estate agent, now selling condos to retirees. Brittany married a plastic surgeon in Atlanta. They deserve each other. I don't hate Richard anymore. Hate requires too much energy, and I need all my energy for building the life I should have had all along. That envelope I handed him at Ashley's graduation contained more than divorce papers. It contained my Declaration of Independence, my refusal to be taken for granted, my decision to stop making myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. The funny thing is, Richard thought he was leaving me. But the truth is, I'd already left him months before. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to make it official. And what a moment it was. If you've ever felt taken for granted, if you've ever sacrificed your dreams for someone who didn't appreciate the gift, if you've ever wondered if it's too late to start over, let me tell you something. It's never too late to reclaim your life. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes betrayal is actually liberation in disguise. And sometimes, just sometimes, the person who thinks they're destroying you is actually setting you free. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories about women who turned their worst moments into their greatest victories. Trust me, you're going to want to see what happens when people underestimate the quiet strength of a woman who's finally had enough. The best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. And I've never been better than I am right now.